There's something happening in your life right now that you don't like. You know exactly what it is. Maybe it's the way someone speaks to you. Maybe it's the condition of your health, or the balance in your account, or the feeling you get on Sunday night before the week begins. You know what it is. And if you're being honest, truly honest, you've known for a while. Now, here's the part most people never stop to consider. The fact that it's still there, the fact that it's still showing up in your life, tells you something important. It tells you that at some point quietly, without ceremony, you agreed to it. Nobody sat you down and asked you to sign anything. There was no contract, no negotiation. But make no mistake, an agreement was made. That's what tolerance really is. It's a silent agreement. Every time you let something slide, every time you look the other way, every time you say, "It's not that bad," or "I'll deal with it later," you are entering into an arrangement with life. And life, let me tell you, always honors the arrangement. Life says, "Oh, this is acceptable to you? Fine, I'll keep sending it." Most people don't think of it that way. Most people think tolerance is patience. They think it's maturity. They think they're being the bigger person. And sometimes that's true. There are moments where patience is a virtue and restraint is the right choice. But there is a very real difference between choosing to be patient and choosing to be passive. Patience has a purpose behind it. Passivity just lets things happen to you. Think about the areas of your life where things have stayed the same for years. Not because you couldn't change them, but because you stopped trying. Maybe you tried once, maybe twice, and it didn't work. So you adjusted. You adjusted your expectations, not your effort. You told yourself a story. This is just the way it is, or some people have it worse. And the story became the standard. That's the danger. The story you tell yourself about what's acceptable becomes the ceiling for what you'll ever have. And it doesn't start big. That's the part nobody warns you about. It starts with small things. You tolerate being 5 minutes late, then 10. Then you tolerate missing the morning entirely. You tolerate skipping one workout, and then a month goes by. You tolerate a tone of voice you wouldn't have accepted 5 years ago. Little by little, inch by inch, the line moves. And you don't notice because each step was small. But you look up one day, and the line is so far from where it started you can't even see where it used to be. That's how tolerance works. It's not one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 tiny surrenders dressed up as no big deal. And every one of them is teaching the world around you what you'll accept. Every one of them is training the people in your life, the circumstances in your life, even your own mind, to deliver exactly what you've shown you're willing to live with. There's an old idea that says, you don't get what you want in life. You get what you tolerate. That might sting a little, but sit with it. Because if you look at the shape of your days, at the patterns, at the things that keep repeating, you'll start to see the fingerprints of your own tolerance everywhere. You'll see where you gave permission, not with words, but with silence, not with a decision, but with the absence of one. And here's the part that matters most. It's not permanent. The agreement can be rewritten, but you have to see it first. You have to be willing to look at your life and say, I allowed this, not with guilt, not with shame, but with clarity. Because the moment you see the agreement for what it is, you hold the power to change it. The moment you stop pretending it happened to you and start recognizing that it happened through you, through your tolerance, through your silence, through your willingness to accept less, that's the moment everything can begin to shift. But nothing shifts until you stop agreeing. Nothing changes until you look at the thing you've been tolerating and say, not anymore. That's where it all begins. Not with a new plan, not with a new goal, with a new standard, with the simple, honest recognition that what you've been allowing is exactly what you've been getting. And if you want something different, the first thing that has to change is what you're willing to put up with. Now, I want to talk about comfort for a moment because comfort is one of the most misunderstood forces in a human life. Everybody wants to be comfortable. That's natural. Nobody gets up in the morning hoping for a difficult day. But there's a difference between resting in comfort you've earned and hiding in comfort you've settled for. And most people, if they're honest, are doing the second one. Comfort has a way of creeping in. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm here to make you mediocre." It comes gently. It wraps itself around your routine, around your habits, around your expectations, and it whispers, "This is fine. This is enough. Why would you risk what you have?" And because it feels warm, because it feels safe, you believe it. But here's what comfort doesn't tell you. While it's keeping you safe, it's also keeping you small. While it's protecting you from failure, it's also protecting you from growth. You can't have it both ways. You cannot stay exactly where you are and also become the person you were meant to be. Those two things don't live in the same house. Think about the last time you grew, really grew, as a person. Was it during a comfortable season? Was it when everything was easy and predictable? Or was it when something forced you out of your routine? When something challenged you, stretched you, demanded more from you than you thought you had? Growth doesn't happen in the easy chair. It happens in the arena. It happens when you're uncertain, when you're uncomfortable, when part of you wants to quit and another part of you decides not to. Now, comfort doesn't just affect one area. It spreads. That's what makes it so costly. You get comfortable in your health, and slowly the walks stop. The meals get lazier. The checkups get skipped. You get comfortable in your relationships, and the conversations get shorter. The effort gets thinner. The spark you used to protect starts going out. You get comfortable at work, and the ambition fades. The creativity dries up, and one day you realize you're just going through the motions. And the worst part? While all of this is happening, you feel fine. That's the trap. Comfort doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like peace. It feels like you've figured life out. But what you've actually done is stop asking life for more. And when you stop asking, life stops delivering. There's a phrase worth remembering. The cost of comfort is always paid later. You don't feel it today. Today it just feels easy. But 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, you look around and realize the life you're living is smaller than the one you imagined. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing was required of you, and you were fine with that. Some people hear this and think it means you should go make yourself miserable. That's not the point. The point is not to seek suffering. The point is to stop avoiding everything that's hard. Because on the other side of hard is where everything you actually want is sitting. The better health, the better relationship, the better career, the better version of you. It's all behind a door marked uncomfortable. And most people walk past that door every day and choose the one marked familiar instead. Now think about what you're tolerating right now in the name of comfort. What have you stopped challenging because it's easier to leave it alone? What truth have you stopped telling because the conversation would be awkward? What dream have you stopped chasing because the risk doesn't feel worth it? Those aren't small questions. Those are the questions that determine the shape of your future. Comfort is not your friend when it becomes your master. When it goes from something you enjoy to something you need, you've lost ground. And most people don't realize it until the gap between where they are and where they could have been becomes impossible to ignore. Don't wait for that moment. Don't wait until the cost shows up on your doorstep. Start paying attention now. Start noticing where comfort has quietly moved in and started making your decisions for you. Because every day you let it sit in the driver's seat is a day your potential doesn't get used. And unused potential doesn't wait around forever. Here's something people get confused about. Goals and standards are not the same thing. Everyone has goals. Everyone has something they'd like to accomplish, something they're hoping for, something they've written down or thought about or talked about with someone they trust. But goals are about the future. Standards are about right now. And what you do right now, the standard you hold yourself to today, is what actually builds the life you end up with. A goal says, I want to be healthy. A standard says, I don't miss workouts. A goal says, I want a great relationship. A standard says, I don't let disrespect go unanswered. A goal says, I want to be successful. A standard says, I don't cut corners, even when nobody is watching. Do you see the difference? A goal is a wish with a deadline. A standard is a line you refuse to cross. And the line is what shapes your life, not the wish. Most people spend all their energy on goals and almost none on standards. They write down where they want to be in 5 years, but never define what they're willing to accept today. And that's why so many people with big goals end up with average results, because the daily standard didn't match the big vision. You can't aim for greatness and tolerate mediocrity at the same time. The math doesn't work. Think about someone you admire, someone who's built something real, not someone who got lucky, but someone who built it brick by brick. If you watch how they live, you'll notice something. They have standards, not just in the big moments, but in the small ones. The way they show up, the way they prepare, the way they treat people, the way they handle disappointment. There's a consistency there. And that consistency isn't talent. It isn't luck. It's a standard they set for themselves that they refuse to drop below. Now here's where most people stumble. They set standards during their motivated moments. You know those moments. You just watched something inspiring. You just had a wake-up call. You just made a promise to yourself at the start of a new year. In those moments, your standards are sky high. But what happens when the motivation fades? What happens on a Tuesday afternoon when nobody's watching and you don't feel like doing the work? That's when standards get tested. That's when most people quietly lower the bar and tell themselves they'll raise it again tomorrow. But tomorrow has a way of turning into next week. Next week turns into next month. And before you know it, the standard you set in your most inspired moment has been replaced by whatever feels easiest in your least inspired one. That's not failure. That's not weakness. That's just what happens when your standards depend on how you feel instead of who you've decided to be. The people who build lives they're proud of don't wait to feel like it. They've already decided what the standard is, and they hold it whether they feel like it or not. Rain or shine, good day or bad day, motivated or exhausted. The standard doesn't move. And because it doesn't move, the results stack up. Day after day, week after week, year after year, the standard compounds. And one day, people look at what they've built and call it success. But it wasn't one success. It was 1,000 days of holding the line. Ask yourself right now, what are your standards? Not your goals, not your dreams. What are the things you absolutely will not tolerate from yourself? What are the non-negotiables? If you can't answer that clearly, don't be surprised when life delivers something less than what you wanted. Because life doesn't give you what you ask for in your best moments. Life gives you what you accept in your worst ones. So this isn't about setting more goals. You probably have enough goals. This is about raising the floor. This is about deciding that the lowest version of your day, the lowest quality of your effort, the bare minimum you'll accept from yourself, that all of that gets an upgrade. Because when the floor goes up, everything above it has to rise with it. You don't build an extraordinary life with extraordinary bursts of effort. You build it with an ordinary standard that you hold extraordinarily well. There's something you need to say that you haven't said yet. There's a conversation sitting in the back of your mind that you've rehearsed 100 times, but never actually had. Maybe it's with someone you love. Maybe it's with someone you work with. Maybe it's with yourself, but it's there. And the fact that it's still there, unspoken, unresolved, is costing you more than you think. Most people avoid hard conversations because they're afraid of what will happen after. They're afraid of conflict. They're afraid of rejection. They're afraid that if they say the thing they really need to say, the relationship will break, the situation will get worse, or they'll be seen as difficult. So they stay quiet. they swallow it, they keep the peace. But here's what nobody tells you. The peace you're keeping isn't really peace. It's tension with a smile on it. When you avoid saying what needs to be said, you don't make the problem go away. You just move it underground. It shows up in your tone of voice. It shows up in your energy. It shows up in the resentment that builds so slowly you don't even realize it's there, until one day it overflows in the wrong place, at the wrong time, over something small that had nothing to do with the real issue. That's what happens when words go unspoken. They don't disappear, they rot. And it's not just conversations with other people. Sometimes the hardest conversation is the one you need to have with yourself. The one where you admit that you've been pretending. Pretending you're fine with a situation you're not fine with. Pretending you don't want more than what you have. Pretending you're not hurt, not frustrated, not tired of your own patterns. That conversation, the one with the mirror, is the one that changes everything. And it's the one most people will go their entire lives avoiding. Here's why that matters. Every boundary you don't set becomes a space that someone or something else fills. Every time you don't say, this isn't acceptable, you're saying this is fine. And the people around you take that at face value. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're holding back. All they know is what you show them. And if what you show them is that everything is okay, they have no reason to change. You've trained them, not with cruelty, not with manipulation, with silence. Now, some people will tell you that setting boundaries and having those hard conversations is selfish. That's not true. What's selfish is letting a relationship slowly die because you were too afraid to be honest. What's selfish is letting your own life shrink because you didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Real love, real respect requires truth. And truth, by nature, is sometimes uncomfortable. But it's the kind of uncomfortable that leads somewhere. It's the kind that clears the air, sets the foundation, and gives both people a fair chance. Think about the relationships in your life that are the strongest, the ones that have lasted, that have weathered storms, that feel real and solid. I'd be willing to guess those relationships have a history of honest conversation. Not easy conversation, honest conversation. The kind where both people felt heard, where both people said what they meant, even when it was hard. Those relationships survived not because people avoided conflict, but because they walked through it together. Now think about the ones that fell apart, the ones that ended badly or faded away. How many of those had a conversation that never happened? How many of those had a truth that got buried until it was too late? If you look closely, you'll find that most broken things in life didn't break all at once. They broke slowly in the silence between what was felt and what was said. So whatever it is you've been avoiding, say it. Not with cruelty, not with blame, but with honesty. Say it because you respect yourself enough to live in truth. Say it because you respect the other person enough to give them a chance to hear it. And if the conversation is with yourself, have it. Sit down, get quiet, and tell yourself the truth about where you are and what needs to change. Because the life you build after that conversation is always bigger than the one you were building while avoiding it. Knowing what you should stop tolerating and actually stopping it are two very different things. Most people already know what needs to change. They know the habits that are dragging them down. They know the situations that are taking more than they give. They know the standards that have slipped. The knowing was never the problem. The doing is where it falls apart. And the reason it falls apart is because people try to make change through motivation. They wait for a feeling, some burst of energy or inspiration, and then they act on it. And for a while, it works. You feel fired up, you make a declaration, you draw a line in the sand, but then a week goes by. The feeling fades. The old patterns start creeping back in, and the line you drew, it gets smudged, then stepped over, then forgotten. That's not change. That's a reaction. Real change doesn't come from motivation. Real change comes from a decision that you back up with action day after day, whether the motivation is there or not. Let me tell you what a real decision looks like. A real decision is when you say, this is how it's going to be from now on, and then your behavior matches that statement for longer than a week. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. Nobody has to see it. But you know. You know when you've actually decided something, and when you've just had a moment. The difference shows up on the hard days. The days when nobody's watching, when it would be easy to slip, when every part of you wants to go back to the old way. Those are the days that separate people who talk about change from people who live it. Now, when you first start drawing real lines, don't be surprised if the world pushes back. People who are used to your old standard won't be thrilled about the new one. Situations that used to get a pass will suddenly feel uncomfortable because you've stopped allowing them. That friction is normal. In fact, if there's no friction, you probably haven't changed much. Change creates resistance. That's how you know it's real. The key is not to flinch. When the pushback comes, when the discomfort rises, when the old habits start calling your name, that's exactly the moment where your new standard is being forged. That's the fire. And if you can hold your ground through it, not perfectly, not without struggle, but without surrendering, you'll come out on the other side stronger than before. That's how standards become permanent. Not because they were easy to hold, but because you held them when it was hard. And here's something most people overlook. You don't have to change everything at once. In fact, trying to overhaul your entire life in one move is one of the fastest ways to end up right back where you started. Pick one thing, one standard you've let slip, one tolerance that's been costing you, just one. Draw the line there. Hold it for a week, then another week, then a month. Let it become part of who you are, not just something you're trying. And once that line feels solid, draw the next one. That's how real, lasting change is built. It's not a revolution, it's a sequence. One line at a time, one standard at a time, one decision followed by one more decision. And over time, those decisions stack up. They become a pattern. The pattern becomes a lifestyle. The lifestyle becomes your identity. And once it's your identity, once you don't just act like someone with high standards, but you are someone with high standards, you'll never go back. Because going back would mean becoming someone you're no longer willing to be. Let me leave you with this thought. 5 years from now, you will be living the life that your standards allow. Not the life your goals promised. Not the life your dreams painted. The life your daily standards allowed. If that thought excites you, you're on the right path. If it makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is an invitation. It's telling you that something needs to move, something needs to rise, and that something is you. You don't need a better plan. You don't need a better opportunity. You don't need someone else to change first. You need to decide what you will no longer accept from the world, from the people around you, and most importantly, from yourself. Draw the line. Mean it. Hold it. And watch what happens when the world finally realizes you're serious. Because the moment you stop tolerating less, life has no choice but to give you more. That's not a theory. That's not wishful thinking. That is the way it works. What you tolerate is what you'll get. So stop tolerating what you don't want and start demanding what you do. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. In a way that a person without one. Here's the big question that he asked me that day, and as simple as it was, it changed my life. He said, "Mr. Rohn, why do you want what you say you want?" You see, he wanted to know why I wanted. He didn't really care about what I wanted, and he didn't want a perfect answer. He didn't want the one that I was putting on my applications, or the one that I had prepared for dinner parties. He meant the real answer, the one underneath the performance, the one I didn't have words for yet because nobody had ever asked me to go looking for it. Why do you want the income you say you want? Why do you want the business you say you want to build? Why do you want the body, the marriage, the freedom, the respect, the influence? Why? And I'm not asking because I think you don't have a reason. I'm asking because I think most people have never actually examined the reason they're carrying. And an unexamined reason is one of the most dangerous things a person can build a life on top of. Here's what I've seen over many years of watching people set goals and chase dreams and fall short and start over and fall short again. The problem is almost never ability. It's almost never resources. It's almost never timing. The problem, more often than anyone wants to admit, is that the person chasing the goal doesn't actually know why they're chasing it. They have a goal, sure. They might even have a plan. But when you peel back the layers and ask them why this particular thing matters to them, why this one out of all the things they could go after, what you get is vague. What you get is borrowed. What you get is something that sounds like it came off a bumper sticker or out of somebody else's mouth. I want to be successful. I want financial freedom. I want to make a difference. And those are fine sentiments, I guess. But they're not reasons. They're slogans. And you can't sustain a life of effort and sacrifice and difficulty on a slogan. A slogan will carry you through a Monday morning. It won't carry you through a year of setbacks. Now let me tell you where most of these vague reasons come from, because I think it's worth understanding the root of the problem. Most people are carrying goals they didn't choose. They inherited them. They picked them up the way you pick up an accent, slowly, unconsciously, from the environment they happened to grow up in. Your family valued a certain kind of success, and so you absorbed that definition without ever asking whether it fit you. Your culture told you what a good life was supposed to look like, and you started building toward that picture without ever examining whether it was a picture you actually wanted hanging on your wall. Your peers moved in a certain direction, and you moved with them, not out of conviction, but out of proximity. And none of that makes you foolish. It makes you human. We're social creatures. We're shaped by the people and the messages around us. But here's the cost of never questioning those influences. You can spend 10, 20, 30 years climbing a ladder with tremendous effort and real sacrifice, only to reach the top and realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. And at that point, you haven't just lost the time. You've lost the energy and the faith you would have needed to start again with something that was genuinely yours. This is what I mean when I say that a weak reason isn't just unhelpful. A weak reason is actively dangerous, because a weak reason will let you start. That's the deceptive part. It has enough energy to get you off the ground. It has enough appeal to make you feel like you're going somewhere. But it doesn't have enough pull to keep you in orbit when the resistance shows up. And the resistance always shows up. Think of it like fuel in an engine. You can have the most beautifully engineered machine ever built, the finest parts, the best design, a body that looks like it was made to move. But if you fill the tank with the wrong fuel, that machine is going to stall. It might run for a mile. It might even run for 10. But sooner or later, the engine is going to cough and choke and quit. And it won't be because the engine was flawed. It'll be because the fuel wasn't right for the journey. That's what a borrowed reason does. It gets you started, and then it leaves you stranded. And the worst part is, you blame yourself. You think, I must not be disciplined enough, or I must not want it badly enough. But the truth is, you might have plenty of discipline and plenty of desire. You just aimed them at something that wasn't yours, and your deepest self knew it even when your conscious mind didn't. So let's talk about the difference, because this is where the real work begins. There's a difference between a borrowed reason and an owned reason. And that difference is the difference between a life that sputters and a life that sustains. A borrowed reason is one that sounds right. It checks the boxes. It would impress someone if you said it out loud at a gathering. But when you're alone, when it's late at night and the doubts are circling and nobody's watching, that reason doesn't generate any heat. It doesn't pull you forward. It just sits there, polite and lifeless, like a painting of a fire. It looks like warmth, but it doesn't produce any. An owned reason is different. An owned reason might not even sound impressive to anyone else. It might be private. It might be specific in a way that only makes sense to you. But when you think about it, something moves in you. Something tightens in your chest or rises in your throat. It's not comfortable. It's not decorative. It's alive. And that aliveness is what you need, because the road ahead isn't going to ask you for impressive words. It's going to ask you for something real, something that comes from deep enough inside you that the surface storms can't reach it. Here's what I've noticed about the people who actually follow through on what they set out to do. It's not that they're smarter. It's not that they're tougher. It's not that they were born with some extra reserve of grit that the rest of us are missing. What they have, and what most people don't, is a reason that belongs to them. A reason they didn't inherit, didn't borrow, didn't copy from a magazine or a speech or a conversation with someone they admired. They went digging. They asked themselves hard questions and sat with uncomfortable answers. They peeled back the layers of I should, and they expect, and everybody says, until they hit something that was undeniably, unmistakably theirs. And once they found it, everything changed. Not because the obstacles got smaller, but because the reason got bigger than the obstacles. That's the shift. That's the moment. It's not when the road gets easier. It's when the reason gets strong enough that the difficulty of the road stops being the deciding factor. And I want to be straight with you about something, because I think honesty is more useful than encouragement at this stage. This excavation is not pleasant. Digging into your own motives is not a comfortable afternoon exercise. It requires you to confront things you may have been avoiding. It requires you to look at goals you've been chasing and ask, did I choose this, or did this choose me? It requires you to consider the possibility that you've been spending years of effort on something that doesn't actually matter to you. Not really, not in the way that counts, and that the fatigue and frustration you've been feeling isn't a discipline problem. It's a direction problem. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you've been pulling a load that your real self never agreed to carry. And the relief that comes from setting that load down, from admitting that this wasn't yours, from going back to the beginning and asking, what do I actually want and why do I actually want it? That relief is not failure. That relief is the first honest breath you've taken in years. So here's what I want to leave you with before we go further tonight. The first act of real ambition is not setting a goal. I know that sounds wrong. I know we've been told our whole lives that the first step is to set a clear goal, write it down, put a timeline on it, and go. And I'm not saying that's bad advice, but it's incomplete advice because it skips the most important step. The first act of real ambition is excavation. It's digging down past the surface, past the expectations, past the noise, until you find a reason that is so specifically, so personally, so undeniably yours that no one could talk you out of it, even if they tried. You don't start by deciding where you're going. You start by understanding why you would make the journey at all. Because the destination can change. The plan can change. The timeline can change. But if the reason is real, if it's truly yours, if it came from the bedrock of who you are and not from the echo of somebody else's voice, then it doesn't matter how many times the map has to be redrawn. You'll keep moving. You'll keep searching. You'll keep finding a way, not because you're extraordinary, but because your reason won't let you stop. And that is the only fuel worth filling your tank with. Not the fuel that sounds impressive, not the fuel that looks good on paper, the fuel that burns hot enough to keep the engine running long after the excitement is gone. And the only thing left between you and quitting is the honest answer to one question: why am I doing this? Find that answer, and I mean really find it. and you will have done something that most people never do. You will have earned the right to set a goal that actually has a chance of surviving the life you're about to put it through. Now let's say you do find your reason. I want to spend some time on something that most people skip entirely. They find a reason, or at least they think they do, and they move straight to action. They start building, start pushing, start grinding. And then 6 months later, when the pressure mounts and the ground shifts beneath them, their reason collapses like a house built on sand. And they can't figure out why, because it felt so real when they started. It felt strong. It felt like enough. But feeling strong and being strong are not the same thing, and tonight I want to show you the difference. I want to break down what actually makes a reason durable, what gives it the structural integrity to hold you steady when everything around you is trying to pull you loose. Because not all reasons are created equal, and if you're going to stake your future on one, you'd better make sure it's built to last. We'll start with the most common kind of reason people carry, because I think it's important to understand why it fails before we talk about what works. The most common reason is vague. It's general. It's the kind of thing that fits on a greeting card. I want to be successful. I want to provide for my family. I want to live a good life. Now, nobody's going to argue with those statements. They're perfectly pleasant. They're perfectly safe. But that's the problem. They're safe. They don't cut deep enough to reach anything that matters. When you say, I want to be successful, what picture does your mind actually produce? If you're honest, it produces something blurry, something generic. A nice house, maybe, a certain amount of money, some vague notion of respect or admiration. But there's no face in the picture. There's no specific moment. There's no scene you can close your eyes and walk into and feel something so strong it makes your throat tighten. And that's the test. If your reason doesn't produce a specific image that creates a specific emotion, it's a wish, not a reason. And wishes are beautiful on birthday cakes, but they're worthless in a crisis. Now let me show you what a strong reason looks like, because the contrast is everything. A strong reason has specificity. It doesn't live in the abstract. It lives in a scene, a moment, a face, a place. It's not, I want to provide for my family. It's, I want my daughter to grow up in a home where she never hears her parents arguing about whether they can afford the electric bill. Can you feel the difference? The first one is a concept. The second one is a photograph. The first one asks nothing of your imagination. The second one puts you in a kitchen with a child under fluorescent light, and it makes you feel something you can't talk yourself out of. That is specificity, and specificity is what gives a reason its shape. Without shape, a reason is like water. It spreads out in every direction and has no force. With shape, it's like water through a nozzle, concentrated, directed, and powerful enough to cut through things that would otherwise stop you cold. When you're sitting at your desk at 9 o'clock at night, exhausted, wondering whether any of this effort is going to amount to anything, a vague reason gives you nothing to hold on to. But a specific reason puts a picture in front of your eyes, and that picture pulls you forward when nothing else can. The second quality of a reason that holds under pressure is what I'd call visceral connection. And by visceral, I mean it lives in your body, not just in your mind. You don't just think about it, you feel it. It produces a physical response. Your jaw tightens, your chest swells, your hands want to move. This is important because the battles you're going to fight on the road to anything worthwhile are not intellectual battles. They're emotional battles. They're battles of fatigue and discouragement and loneliness. And those battles are not won by logic. Logic will tell you all the reasons your effort makes sense, and you'll nod along and agree completely and still not get out of the chair. But a reason that lives in your gut, a reason that you feel the way you feel hunger or anger or love, that kind of reason doesn't need to convince you. It doesn't need to present an argument. It moves you the way instinct moves you, beneath thought, beneath deliberation. at a level where resistance has very little power. That's what it means to have a visceral connection to your purpose. And most people have never developed that connection because they've been taught to think about their goals instead of feel them. And here is the third quality. And this one might be the most important of all, and it's the one that separates the reasons that hold from the reasons that crumble when the real weight comes down. A reason that survives serious pressure almost always has a dimension that reaches beyond self-interest. Let me say that carefully, because I don't mean that self-interest is wrong. Wanting something for yourself, wanting a better life, a stronger body, a sharper mind, a fuller bank account, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, self-interest is a perfectly fine engine for getting started. But self-interest on its own has a ceiling. There comes a point in every difficult journey where the cost exceeds the personal benefit, at least in the short term. There comes a moment where the suffering you're going through is greater than any reward you can imagine receiving. And in that moment, a purely self-interested reason runs out of fuel. It says, this isn't worth it anymore. The pain exceeds the payoff. Let's stop. But a reason that includes someone else, a child, a family, a community, a cause, someone whose life is changed by whether or not you keep going, that reason has a different kind of fuel. It's not just burning your own desire. It's burning something larger, something that makes the equation about more than just you. And when the equation is about more than just you, the math changes. The suffering doesn't shrink, but the meaning of the suffering expands. And meaning is what makes unbearable things bearable. Imagine two people training for the same difficult physical challenge. Same course, same conditions, same level of preparation. The first person is doing it because they want to prove to themselves that they can. That's a fine reason. That's a worthy reason. And it will carry them a long way, through the early mornings, through the sore muscles, through the first few obstacles. But at some point, deep in the middle of the challenge, when their body is screaming and their mind is begging them to quit, that reason is going to face a test it may not survive. Because in that moment, the person can say, I've already proven enough. I don't need to prove anything more. I can stop and still respect myself. And they'd be right. They could stop and still hold their head up. The reason gives them permission to quit, because it's already been partially fulfilled. Now look at the second person. This person is doing the same challenge, but their reason is different. They're doing it because their father was told he'd never walk again after an accident, and they want to cross that finish line carrying a photograph and a message that says, if you couldn't quit, I won't either. That reason isn't about proving anything to themselves. It reaches beyond them. It includes someone else's story, someone else's struggle, someone else's face. And when that person hits the same wall of pain and exhaustion, the calculation is entirely different. Quitting doesn't just mean stopping. Quitting means breaking a promise that extends beyond their own, about more than just you. The math changes. The suffering doesn't shrink, but the meaning of the suffering expands. And meaning is what makes unbearable things bearable. Imagine two people training for the same difficult physical challenge. Same course, same conditions, same level of preparation. The first person is doing it because they want to prove to themselves that they can. That's a fine reason. That's a worthy reason. And it will carry them a long way, through the early mornings, through the sore muscles, through the first few obstacles. But at some point, deep in the middle of the challenge, when their body is screaming and their mind is begging them to quit, that reason is going to face a test it may not survive. Because in that moment, the person can say, I've already proven enough. I don't need to prove anything more. I can stop and still respect myself. And they'd be right. They could stop and still hold their head up. The reason gives them permission to quit, because it's already been partially fulfilled. Now look at the second person. This person is doing the same challenge, but their reason is different. They're doing it because their father was told he'd never walk again after an accident, and they want to cross that finish line carrying a photograph and a message that says, if you couldn't quit, I won't either. That reason isn't about proving anything to themselves. It reaches beyond them. It includes someone else's story, someone else's struggle, someone else's face. And when that person hits the same wall of pain and exhaustion, the calculation is entirely different. Quitting doesn't just mean stopping. Quitting means breaking a promise that extends beyond their own comfort. And that extension, that reaching beyond the self, is what gives a reason the weight to hold when everything else is trying to pull you loose. Now I want to introduce a way of thinking about this that I find really helpful, and it's the metaphor of an anchor. Think about a boat on the ocean. On a calm day, you can anchor that boat with almost anything. A bucket of rocks, a cinder block, a chain attached to a tire. In still water, even a modest anchor will hold you in place. And on the calm days of your life, that's exactly what happens. A modest reason, a vague reason, a borrowed reason, it holds you just fine when the water is smooth. You go about your business, you do your work, you feel steady, and you think, my reason is strong enough. I'm anchored. But you're not anchored. You're just floating in calm water and mistaking the absence of a storm for the presence of strength. Because when the storm comes, and the storm always comes, that modest anchor is going to be ripped off the bottom like it was never there. The boat is going to drift, and you're going to drift with it. And you'll end up somewhere you never planned to be, wondering what happened. What happened is that your anchor didn't have the weight for the conditions you encountered. You anchored for a pond, and life put you in the ocean. An anchor with real weight is different. It's forged from something specific, something visceral, something connected to a world larger than your own comfort. It doesn't just sit on the bottom. It digs into the floor. It grips. It holds, not because the conditions are easy, but because the anchor itself is heavy enough to resist what's pulling against it. And when the storm hits, the boat still rocks. Make no mistake about that. Having a strong anchor doesn't mean you won't feel the storm. You'll feel every wave. You'll feel the wind and the spray and the uncertainty. But you won't drift. You'll hold your position. You'll get through the night. And when the sun comes up and the water calms, you'll still be exactly where you intended to be. That is the difference between a reason that holds and a reason that doesn't. It's not about whether the storm comes. It's about what you're anchored with when it arrives. So let me ask you to do something right now in your mind. Think about the thing you say you want most, the goal, the ambition, the dream, whatever word you want to use. Now think about the reason behind it. And I want you to run it through these 3 tests, honestly, without flattering yourself. First, is it specific? Can you close your eyes and see a scene, a face, a moment, a place? Or is it a fog, pleasant but shapeless, warm but weightless? If it's a fog, it needs work. It needs to be sharpened into something so clear you could describe it to a stranger and make them see it too. Second, is it visceral? Does thinking about it produce something in your body? A tightness, a heat, a quickening? Or does it just produce a thought, a nod, a mild sense of agreement? If it only lives in your head, it's not deep enough yet. You need to push it down into your chest, into your gut, into the place where things are felt rather than just understood. And third, does it reach beyond you? Is there someone else in the picture? Is there a face other than your own? Is there a life other than your own that changes because of whether or not you follow through? If the answer is no, I'm not telling you the reason is worthless, but I am telling you it has a ceiling, and that ceiling is lower than you think, and you're going to hit it at the worst possible time. Most people have been trying to weather serious storms with decorative anchors. That's not a criticism. That's a diagnosis. They chose their reason with good intentions, but without enough scrutiny. They picked the first thing that sounded noble or felt inspiring, and they never tested it for weight. And the result is that every time the water gets rough, they come loose. Every time real difficulty shows up, The kind that doesn't resolve in an afternoon. Their anchor slides across the bottom, and they drift away from the very thing they said they wanted most. And the tragedy is that they often have everything else they need. They have the talent, they have the opportunity, they have the intelligence and the work ethic and the desire. The only thing they're missing is an anchor built for the actual conditions of the life they're trying to live. So if you take nothing else from this part of our conversation tonight, take this. Go back to your reason. Look at it with honest eyes. And if it's vague, sharpen it. If it's only in your head, push it into your body. If it's only about you, find the part that's about someone else. Because you're going to need that anchor. Not today, maybe. Not this week. But the storm is coming. And when it arrives, the only thing that's going to matter is whether your reason has the weight to hold you where you want to be. Now, I want to talk about something that most people get entirely wrong about having a strong reason, and it's this. They think that once they've found it, the hard part is over. They think that finding the right reason is like finding the right key. And once you have it, every door just opens smoothly and you walk through without resistance. And I get why people think that, because that's how it's been sold to them. Find your passion and the work won't feel like work. Find your purpose and you'll leap out of bed every morning. Find your why and the obstacles will melt away. That sounds beautiful, and it makes for a wonderful page in a book, but it's a lie. It's a well-intentioned, nicely packaged, deeply misleading lie. Because the truth is, finding your reason does not remove the difficulty from the road ahead. Your reason is not a magic spell that makes hard things feel easy. Your reason is the thing that makes hard things feel worth it. And those are two completely different experiences, and if you mix them up, you're going to be blindsided the first time your purpose meets real pain. So what does that mean? When something feels easy, there's no weight, there's no friction. You move through it the way you move through a pleasant afternoon, lightly, effortlessly, without having to summon anything from inside yourself. That's what people expect their reason to do for them. They expect that once they've found the right motivation, the right purpose, the effort will feel light. The early mornings will feel light. The sacrifice will feel light. The setbacks will feel light. And when those things don't feel light, when they feel exactly as heavy as they would feel without a reason, people panic. They think something is wrong. They think they must have the wrong reason, because if it were the right one, wouldn't this be easier? And so they go back to searching. They abandon the reason, abandon the work, and start digging for a new motivation that will finally make the whole thing feel effortless. And they'll search for that their entire life and never find it, because it doesn't exist. No reason, no matter how deep, no matter how true, has the power to remove the weight from difficult things. That's not what reasons do. What a real reason does is something far more valuable, but far less glamorous. A real reason gives you a place to put the weight. Think of it this way. Imagine you're carrying something heavy across a long distance. If you're carrying it for no reason, if someone just handed you a load and said, "Walk," every step is misery. Every step your mind is asking, "Why am I doing this? What's the point? When can I put this down?" The weight feels unbearable, not because your body can't handle it, but because your mind has no framework to justify the suffering. There's no meaning attached to the effort. It's just pain for the sake of pain, and the human spirit was never built to endure that. But now imagine you're carrying the same load, the same weight, the same distance, and the load is medicine. And at the other end of the road is someone you love who won't survive the night without it. Has the weight changed? Not 1 ounce. Your back still aches. Your legs still burn. Your lungs still strain. The physical experience is identical, but the entire meaning of the experience has been transformed, because now the weight has a place. It's not pointless. It's not random. It's connected to something that matters so deeply that putting the load down is no longer an option your mind is willing to consider. That is what a strong reason does. It doesn't make the load lighter. It makes setting it down unthinkable. And this is why I say that your reason only becomes real after it survives something. Before difficulty arrives, before the storm makes landfall, your reason is untested. It's a theory. It's an opinion you hold about yourself. You believe it's strong. You feel confident in it. You might even be right. But you don't know yet. You can't know yet. Because strength that has never been tested isn't strength, it's potential. And potential, while valuable, is not the same thing as proven capacity. Think about it this way. A bridge engineer can design a bridge on paper and calculate that it will hold 10,000 tons. The math might be flawless, the design might be brilliant, but until a real load crosses that bridge, until the steel bends and the cables stretch and the wind pushes against the structure, no one truly knows whether the bridge holds. The theory says yes, but only the test confirms it. Your reason is that bridge. It exists in your mind, beautifully designed, structurally sound in theory, but it hasn't been loaded yet. It hasn't been bent and stressed and pushed to its limits. And until it has, you're carrying an untested blueprint, not a proven structure. Now here's why this matters, and I want you to hear this clearly, because I think it's the piece that changes everything. Most people interpret the arrival of difficulty as evidence that something has gone wrong. They set out with their reason, full of conviction, and the first time life pushes back hard, their instinct is to question the whole thing. Maybe this isn't meant to be. Maybe I chose the wrong path. Maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And those thoughts feel very wise in the moment, because they come dressed in the language of reflection and self-awareness. But what's actually happening is that the reason is being tested for the first time. And instead of letting the test do its work, the person is running from it. They're pulling the bridge down before the load has finished crossing. And in doing so, they never get to find out whether their reason was strong enough, because they didn't give it the chance to prove itself. Every meaningful thing you'll ever pursue, every single one without exception, has what I call a middle chapter. The middle chapter is the stretch of the journey that nobody warns you about because it's not dramatic enough to make a good story. It doesn't have the excitement of the beginning, when everything is new and the energy is high and the vision is fresh. It doesn't have the triumph of the end, when the results finally show up and the sacrifice pays off and everyone can see what you built. The middle chapter is the long, gray, unglamorous stretch between those two moments, and it's where most people quit. Not because they lack talent, not because the goal was wrong, but because the middle chapter is where your reason faces its first honest examination, and most reasons aren't ready for it. In the middle chapter, the initial excitement has completely disappeared. You can't even remember what it felt like to be that fired up, that certain, that charged. The results haven't shown up yet, or if they have, they're so small and so slow that they feel almost insulting compared to the effort you've put in. You look at how far you've come and it doesn't seem like enough. You look at how far you still have to go and it seems impossible. And the people around you, the ones who were cheering at the beginning, have gone quiet. Not because they stopped caring, but because your journey is no longer new and interesting to them. They have their own lives, their own struggles, their own middle chapters. And so you find yourself in the most dangerous position a person can be in, alone with your effort, alone with your doubt, and armed with nothing but the answer to one question. Is my reason bigger than this moment? That question is not theoretical. That question is the entire test. When you're in the middle chapter, exhausted, discouraged, uncertain, invisible, and you ask yourself why you're still doing this, the answer that comes back is either strong enough to keep you moving or it isn't. There's no middle ground. And this is why everything we talked about earlier matters so much. If your reason is vague, it won't produce an answer that has any force behind it. I want to be successful produces nothing useful at 2 in the morning when you're wondering whether any of this matters. But I want my kids to grow up knowing that their father didn't quit on himself. that produces something, that produces heat, that produces a physical, visceral, undeniable pull that doesn't need to be argued for or intellectually defended. It simply is, and it's stronger than the fatigue, stronger than the doubt, stronger than the silence of the middle chapter. That's the difference between a reason that survives the test and one that doesn't. One gives you words, the other gives you fuel. And here's the part that I think is the most beautiful, and I don't use that word casually. When your reason survives the middle chapter, when you carry it through the long gray stretch and come out the other side still holding it, something happens to that reason. It changes, it deepens. Before the test, it was something you believed. After the test, it's something you've proven. Before the test, it was an idea you held about yourself. After the test, it's part of your identity. There's a huge difference between a person who says, I believe I can endure hard things, and a person who says, I have endured hard things, and I chose to keep going. The first person is making a prediction. The second person is stating a fact, and that fact becomes a foundation, a piece of solid ground inside you that can't be taken away by circumstance or opinion or bad luck. Every future challenge you face it standing on the ground of what you've already survived. And that ground is more valuable than any strategy, any technique, any tool you'll ever pick up. Because strategies can be forgotten and tools can be lost. But the knowledge that you've been tested and held your position, that stays with you for good. So I want to challenge you tonight to stop running from the test. Stop interpreting difficulty as a signal that you've chosen wrong. Start seeing it for what it actually is. The process by which your reason is forged into something trustworthy. You wouldn't trust a sword that's never been struck against anything. You wouldn't trust a wall that's never felt the weight it was built to bear. Why would you trust a reason that's never been pressed, never been strained, never been asked to hold you up when everything inside you wanted to sit down? The pressing is not the enemy. The pressing is the process. It's how your reason goes from being something you carry to something that carries you. And once that transition happens, once your reason has been tested and proven and made real by what it's survived, you'll have something that no amount of comfort or ease could ever give you. You'll have certainty, not the certainty that the road ahead will be smooth. That kind of certainty doesn't exist and never will. But the certainty that whatever comes, your reason is strong enough to meet it. That certainty is not arrogance. That certainty is the quiet, hard-won knowledge of a person who has been through something real and discovered that what they're carrying is not a theory. It's a truth. And a truth, unlike a theory, does not collapse when the pressure builds. A truth holds, and so will you. Now, we may need to go where most people are not willing to. And I think the reason they haven't gone there is because it requires a kind of honesty that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel inspiring. It doesn't produce the rush of excitement that setting a new goal produces, or the warmth of discovering a new reason. What it produces is clarity. And clarity, while invaluable, is not always comfortable. Because clarity means seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were. And what I want you to see clearly tonight is this. The reason most people's reasons fail them is not that the reasons aren't good enough. It's that the person carrying the reason never sat down and had an honest conversation with themselves about what that reason was going to cost. They committed to the destination without reading the price tag. They said yes to the dream without understanding the invoice. And when the bills started showing up, they were shocked. And the shock is what broke them, not the bills themselves. When you encounter a cost you expected, it's difficult, but it's manageable. You budgeted for it. You knew it was coming. You set something aside, emotionally and practically, to handle it when it showed up. But when you encounter a cost you didn't expect, when the bill arrives and you had no idea this was part of the deal, the experience is entirely different. It's not just difficult, it's destabilizing. It shakes your confidence in the whole thing. You start questioning not just the cost, but the goal itself. If it's going to be like this, maybe I don't want it after all. And that reaction is perfectly natural, but it's also perfectly avoidable. Not by eliminating the cost, you can't do that. The cost is the cost. But by eliminating the surprise, because it's almost never the suffering itself that makes a person quit. It's the gap between what they expected and what they encountered. Close that gap before you begin, and you take away the single most destructive force in the entire journey, the feeling of being blindsided by a reality you should have seen coming. This is what I call the honest yes, and I want you to understand it because I believe it's one of the most important things a person can do before they set out on any serious pursuit. The honest yes is not a moment of enthusiasm. It's not the rush you feel when you first see the vision, when the goal is shiny and new and everything feels possible. That rush is wonderful, but it's not an agreement, it's an emotion. The honest yes is the agreement that comes after the emotion. When you've sat down with yourself in a quiet room, with no audience, no music, no applause, and you've laid out on the table everything this pursuit is going to ask of you. Not the glamorous parts, not the success story you'll tell someday. The real parts, the hard parts, the parts that nobody puts in the brochure. And I want to be specific because vague honesty is almost as useless as dishonesty. When I say lay it out on the table, I mean make a list. Write it down if you have to. What is this path going to demand from your time? Not a lot of time. That's vague. How many evenings a week will you spend working instead of resting? How many weekends will you lose? How many seasons will pass where you're building something that nobody can see yet? Where you have nothing to show for your sacrifice except the knowledge that you showed up again? What is this path going to demand from your relationships? Because it will demand something. There will be people who don't understand what you're doing. There will be gatherings you miss. There will be conversations you can't fully be present for because your mind is somewhere else, working on something that the people around you may not value the way you do. There will be loneliness in this, a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being deeply committed to something that the people in your daily life are not committed to. Not because they're bad people, but because it's your journey, not theirs. And that distinction creates a distance that no amount of love entirely closes. What is this path going to demand from your comfort? Because you are going to be uncomfortable, and not in the temporary, exciting way that adventure novels describe. You're going to be uncomfortable in the boring, grinding, unglamorous way. You're going to have stretches where you feel foolish. Stretches where you're investing money you're not sure you'll get back. Stretches where people look at what you're doing and their faces tell you they think you're wasting your time, even if their mouths are too polite to say it. You're going to have moments of real embarrassment, not the charming, self-deprecating kind, but the real kind, the kind that makes your face hot and your stomach turn. You're going to make mistakes that cost you things you care about, and you're going to have to keep going anyway, carrying the weight of those mistakes along with everything else. That's on the invoice. That's part of what you're agreeing to when you say yes to something meaningful. And if you don't acknowledge it before you begin, it will ambush you later. And ambushes are what break people. So the honest yes works like this. You sit down with all of that laid out in front of you, the lost evenings, the financial risk, the loneliness, the discomfort, the embarrassment, the stretches of invisibility where nobody's watching and nobody cares, and the only witness to your effort is you. You look at all of it, honestly, without softening it, without telling yourself it won't be that bad, without imagining that somehow you'll be the exception who gets the reward without paying the full price. And then you ask yourself one question, not, can I endure this? That's the wrong question, because almost anyone can endure almost anything for a short time. The right question is my reason worth this specific list of costs? Not worth it in general, not worth it in the abstract, worth this, worth these particular sacrifices, worth this specific collection of difficult experiences that I have just named out loud and looked at with clear eyes. Because when you say yes to that question, when you say yes knowing exactly what you're agreeing to, that yes is made of something entirely different than the yes you said in a moment of excitement. that yes has roots, that yes has been tested against reality before reality even showed up. And when the costs start coming, as they will, you don't experience shock. You experience recognition. You look at the difficulty and you say, I know you. I expected you. I accounted for you. You're not a surprise, and you're not a reason to stop. That is the difference between the people who quit and the people who keep going. And I want you to hear this because I think it's the most misunderstood part of perseverance. The people who quit are not weaker than the people who continue. They're not less talented. They're not less passionate. In a lot of cases, they wanted it just as badly. The difference is that the people who continue made their agreement with open eyes. They didn't romanticize the process. They didn't tell themselves a fairy tale about how it was going to feel. They looked at the invoice, every line of it, and they said, yes, I will pay this. And because they said yes before the bill showed up, they didn't have to make the decision in the heat of the moment, when their emotions were raw, and their energy was low, and their judgment was clouded by pain. The decision was already made. It was made in a clear room on a calm evening, with a steady hand and a sober mind, and no amount of difficulty could reopen the case. The case was settled. The verdict was in. The honest yes was given, and it held. So happens what happens when a person hasn't done this. The person who says yes without examining the cost is basically signing a contract they haven't read. And for a while, that doesn't matter. The early days of any pursuit are usually manageable. The costs are low, the excitement is high, and the gap between expectation and reality is small enough to ignore. But as the journey goes on, the costs increase, the sacrifices get deeper, the loneliness gets sharper, the uncertainty gets heavier. And because this person never cataloged those costs in advance, each one feels like a betrayal. Each one feels like evidence that something has gone wrong, that the path is broken, that they were misled. Nobody told me it would be like this, they say. And they're right, nobody told them. But that's because they never asked. They never sat down and demanded the truth from themselves. They took the brochure at face value, and now they're standing in the middle of a reality that the brochure didn't prepare them for. And they feel cheated, not by anyone else, by their own unwillingness to look at the full picture before they started. I want to leave you with something about this honest yes that I think is deeply important. And it's something that most people get backwards. Most people think that honestly facing the cost of their ambition will discourage them. They think that if they really look at how hard it's going to be, they'll lose their nerve. They'll talk themselves out of it. And so they deliberately avoid the exercise. They keep the picture blurry on purpose because they believe that ignorance is what gives them the courage to begin. But that's backwards. Ignorance doesn't give you courage. Ignorance gives you enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is not courage. Enthusiasm is what you feel when you don't know what's coming. Courage is what you have when you know exactly what's coming and you step forward anyway. The person who has done the honest yes and still says, I'm going, that person has real courage because their commitment is based on truth, not fantasy. And a commitment based on truth can withstand anything the journey throws at it because the journey can't show them anything worse than what they've already agreed to face. So I'm asking you tonight, before you go any further, down whatever road you're on, to stop and have this conversation with yourself. Not the cheerful conversation, not the vision board conversation, the honest conversation. Sit down in a quiet room and list every cost you can think of. Every uncomfortable truth about what lies ahead, every sacrifice, every risk, every stretch of difficult ground. Write it all down. Don't spare yourself. Don't protect yourself from the reality of your own ambition. And then look at that list and look at your reason, the specific, visceral, bigger than yourself reason we talked about earlier, and ask the question, is this reason worth this cost? If the answer is no, that's not failure, that's wisdom. That's a person who saved themselves years of misdirected effort by telling the truth early. But if the answer is yes, If you look at that list and your reason still burns hotter than the price tag, then you have something that almost nobody has. You have an honest yes. And an honest yes, given with open eyes and a clear mind, is the strongest foundation a person can build anything on. Because the storms can come and the costs can pile up, and the middle chapter can stretch out longer than you ever imagined, and none of it will surprise you. You saw it coming. You named it. You agreed to it. And your reason, tested against the truth of what it would actually demand, held firm. That is not optimism. That is not motivation. That is architecture. And architecture, unlike enthusiasm, does not collapse when the weather changes. Now, I want to paint a picture for you because we've spent this evening talking about finding your reason, testing it, strengthening it, and honestly counting its cost. And all of that is essential work. But I don't want you to leave tonight thinking that the only function of a strong reason is to help you survive hard times. That's part of it, sure. That's what we've been focused on, and it matters a lot. But there's another side to this that most people never get to see, because most people quit before they experience it. And that other side is this: a reason that is clear, tested, and honestly accepted doesn't just help you push through obstacles. It reorganizes your entire life. It simplifies things that used to be complicated. It quiets noise that used to be deafening. It answers, before they're even asked, 1,000 daily questions that would otherwise eat up your time and energy and leave you exhausted by noon without having accomplished a single thing that matters. And that reorganization, that simplification, is not a side benefit. It is one of the most practical, tangible, measurable advantages a person can have. Let's start with decisions, because I think this is where you see the effect most clearly. Think about how much of your life is spent deciding. Not the big decisions, those come along rarely. I'm talking about the small ones, the daily ones, the ones that seem insignificant on their own, but collectively eat up hours of your week. Should I go to this event or stay home and work? Should I take this meeting or protect my schedule? Should I spend this money or save it? Should I say yes to this favor or draw a boundary? Should I chase this opportunity or focus on what I've already started? Every single one of those questions takes energy. Every single one of them creates a small moment of friction in your day, a pause, a hesitation, a weighing of options. And most people are drowning in those moments, not because the questions are hard, but because they have no filter to run them through. They evaluate every decision on its own merits, from scratch, every single time. And that process is exhausting, because it forces you to rebuild your priorities in every moment, as if you've never thought about them before. Now watch what happens when a person has a clear, deeply held reason at the center of their life. Those same decisions don't go away. The questions still come, but the process of answering them is completely different, because now there's a filter. Now there's a standard. Every question gets run through a single simple test. Does this serve the reason, or doesn't it? I begin
each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. Day 120. Whoa. 9.8 out of 10 for effort. Could have tried harder.